Welcome to The Investor, a podcast where I, Joel Palafinkel, your host, dives deep into the minds of the world's most influential institutional investors. In each episode, we sit down with an investor to hear about their journeys and how global markets are driving capital allocation. So join us on this journey as we explore these insights. A second, but I am just really excited to have a good buddy of mine, David Tao. Known him for a couple years now, and we're just buddies in the city. And it's just, I think one thing that I think about friendship is when somebody calls you and you get excited when they're calling you. So whenever David calls me or texts me, I'm like, wow, it's good to see how he's doing. I think one thing that David does too is he'll just periodically just text you to see how you're doing. So that's kind of the preamble. David Tao is just a serial entrepreneur, angel investor. He's also been an LP in funds, so just super active. He's given me advice as a founder. So I think just an all-around good guy, good person. So David, thanks for coming on the show.
Joel, thanks for having me. And it goes both ways. I get messages from you sometimes that really, really brighten my day. I think sometimes we get caught up in what we're doing. And even as adults, even in a place that's very social, like we both live in New York City, it's very easy to kind of silo yourself and literally go weeks without talking to friends because everyone's so busy.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that you're really good at and one thing that I'm really appreciative of, and I try and do is like, hey, can I take 10 minutes a couple times a week and like, who are some people I haven't talked to in a little while? Who are some people who could like feel a little bit of love? And it always, every time I do that, every time I take 10 minutes and I text like 4 or 5 people who I haven't talked to in a while, something good always comes out of that. Either we meet up and we talk about some like important life stuff. Sometimes people are going through big life events. Maybe it's a breakup. Maybe a loved one died or passed away. Maybe something happened in the business world and they just kind of want that. Or like sometimes those will result in, I've become an investor in a couple funds, literally just because like I got a text from someone or I texted someone to see how they were doing. And they're like, oh, I'm incubating this new fund or something. And some of those worked out really well. I've made some angel investments in some really cool companies and some really successful companies because of that. So I think the power of just like a no pressure, no stakes check-in is really something I really try and honor. And I know you do the same.
Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about this. The best time to raise money is actually when you're not raising. So if somebody's just kind of casually checking in on you, they probably, that timing and that vibe was probably much better than just kind of like being in sales mode. And, I know it's tough. A lot of people have, just me personally, I can see from my platform, funds have cut their allocations, so they're super thirsty and hungry sometimes. And like, you can kind of feel that vibe. And, it kind of makes you feel like a little under pressure, like, hey, you know what, like I've got to be actionable versus kind of like, hey, let's just get to know each other and let's grab a drink or do dinner. And I think sometimes that's the best time to actually kind of try to build those capital relationships.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and, I think one thing that we can, start with is just your career, your background. I know, we have some similar parallels, right? You were in the media space. I worked for Hearst magazines for some time. So I used to, so I get kind of like the editorial, there's a whole church and state between the editorial, voice versus like ads, right? And, there is really strategic things that ads can do, where they can do advertorials, where they can kind of create some type of brand vision where it's still kind of embedded in the editorial voice, but there's a big, huge stamp that says ad to just make sure that that's clear that it is not specifically the opinion of the editor.
Yeah, I think that in talking about our experience, we both got our, well, I don't want to say starts in media because I think your career has taken so many interesting turns that I kind of lose track of what happened when. But, when I first started in media right out of college, I was doing some writing for, I was the staff writer for fortune.com. And it was right when they were trying to figure out like all these legacy, especially business publications, were trying to figure out well, is print really dying? And the
Mhm.
answer is print was dying, and a lot of them were really slow to accept that. I'm not, you know,
Sure.
naming names, but a lot of them were really slow to accept that. And so you had a huge influx of traditional magazine writers, magazine sales folks, circulation folks who suddenly had to move over to the digital space and learn new skill sets. And I got my start as a journalist right kind of at that point, and very quickly moved over into the startup realm and started working for a
Mhm.
digital content startup, because it's kind of where everyone was being pushed at the big publications, and I thought there would be
Yeah.
opportunity to learn a lot, and I sure did, in the startup realm. So I think it was an interesting time, and we've swapped some war stories about like,
Mhm.
well, how do you try and write content, produce good content, grow revenue when traditional print or traditional media models are dying, right? And that's kind of
Mhm.
been something I feel like has followed me my entire career. Is okay, what is the future of media? Is there a way to look ahead instead of like playing catch up? And is there a way to
Mhm.
actually grow a media company? And I think right now we're like, literally, while we're recording this right now, we're in a
Mhm.
time in a period of media consolidation and a lot of really rough things happening in the media space. I mean, Vice just declared bankruptcy, I think, last week. You know, they were once
Mhm.
valued at 5.7 billion. Now they're kind of having a scrap sale for 225 million. Um, we've seen layoffs at, the Wall Street Journal, and I think the Post as
Mhm.
well. BuzzFeed just shuttered BuzzFeed News. NPR just had a massive round of layoffs,
Mhm.
and I think that it's it seems like a sad time for media. But what I hope, one thing I would love to talk about on this conversation and share, and you
Mhm.
and I have talked about this, is there are still media success stories, and there are still people building really cool audiences and really dedicated audiences, and actually serving underserved content communities and audiences online. They're just not necessarily getting all the press. So one thing I'm trying to
Yeah.
do is, we, spoiler alert, we just exited a company called Barbend Media, which I co-founded in 2016, and we had a what I would call, honestly, a pretty stellar exit event. And it's a real feel good story. Everyone
Mhm.
kept their jobs. In fact, Barbend, which is now under new ownership, and I'm actually, by the way, still a full time employee there because I
Mhm.
want to be, we're hiring. We're hiring new folks,
Yeah.
full time and
Mhm.
contractors. It's a growing brand, it's a growing media environment. And so it's not all the sky is falling in media. There's some
Mhm.
real success stories. And I'm really thankful that I get to come on this and talk about a lot of different things, but hopefully convince even one or two people out there that the media space does have rich opportunities, especially for entrepreneurs and people who want to identify underserved content communities.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think media has evolved. So when I was at Hearst, there is some strategic partnerships and even acquisitions with blogs, right? So blogs
Mm-hmm.
were really outperforming. If you think about I think it was the List, the Skim. So
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
these two women that I think they exported their Gmail emails and just used that to start seeding their first newsletter, and they just kind of grew, and there was a point where their viewership was higher than the New York Times. So there was a whole audience, and there still is a whole audience of people that read. I used to read, very aggressively when I was younger. I don't read as much just because I don't have the time. So the only way that I can consume a book is really if I go for a 20-minute run. It forces me to try to run, and then I'll listen to Audible.
Right, right.
And the issue with me is sometimes I kind of tune out a little bit, so I got to like maybe rewind a little bit to make sure that I get back on track. But that for me has been kind of the best way to consume, written content. And I guess my question to you is: do you still have time to like read books, and do you prefer to read them? Do you like Kindles? Do you like Audible?
Yeah, for the past 5 months, I have not been reading a lot because
Hmm.
we went through
Oh
an
yeah.
acquisition, inquiry, due diligence,
Hmm.
and acquisition phase, and I'm
Yeah.
settling into a new role. But I am a traditionalist. I don't love audiobooks. I think they're great
Hmm.
for people. When I'm working out, I like to listen to music, or I like to listen to nothing at all. I'm one of those
Yeah.
people. I know everyone's rolling their eyes. It's like, you listen to nothing at all. It's like, sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I have a little space in my apartment
Hmm.
that is like my reading nook,
Yeah.
and I'm excited to get back into it this summer. I had a pretty good streak last year of reading a lot of books. I do a lot of work in the spirits industry and in
Hmm.
the alcohol industry, so I read a lot of books on the history and impact of alcohol on
Hmm.
society, whether you drink or not. I think it's really fascinating, and I'm a big travel reader. So I
Hmm.
am one of those people, if I'm going on a trip, I will go to the bookstore in the airport and I will overpay and get a stack of, whatever looks interesting.
Yeah.
And I will carry it with me and I will read it. And then I will
Hmm.
like oftentimes leave those in hotel lobbies or just like
Yeah.
give them to travel companions or like the person
Sure.
next to me on the plane. Like, hey, do you want to read this? So yeah, when I'm traveling, I tend to read more. And now that things have calmed down a little bit
Hmm.
post Barbend acquisition, I try and block that time at night. Honestly, it helps me sleep. I don't
Yeah.
love looking at screens right before bed. I prefer looking at like, hard copy pages, and that
Hmm.
allows me to wind down a little bit more effectively.
That is a trend too. So you see kind of like the Gen Z crowd wanting to buy old record players and cassette players. So there is kind of a little movement for just vintage, equipment. I've seen that as kind of something, on Pinterest, people are kind of buying, just kind of that old fashioned
Yeah.
thing, stuff that you can hold with your hands. So that's kind of something that I think is coming back. I'd love to go through your career timeline because as we all just figure out our identities of who we are, we can wear different hats and we can have different lives, right? So I think one part of you that I see is kind of like this fitness person, like this fitness expert, and then I see like this angel investor, but then I also see like this whiskey expert, and those are like three different identities that all kind of stitch together into like your DNA. But like all of that got formed through different experiences and just kind of from who you are. So obviously you have roots in Kentucky,
Mhm.
so that naturally ties into the whiskey. And I know most of this stuff, but I think it'd be really good to kind of tell that story, to the audience, and then maybe we can lead up to the acquisition as well. I read your entire blog to really just kind of be briefed on it, but I think it's also good to maybe just share what you're allowed to, on that journey. I mean, especially like what was going on in your head when you thought about possibly having that opportunity to have an
Yeah.
exit.
Well, I appreciate that, Joel, and I'll start. I'll try and give the elevator pitch of life. So I was born and raised in Kentucky. Grew up in a town called Bardstown, which is really the center of the bourbon industry in America. I mean, obviously in America because bourbon has to be made in America. It doesn't actually have to be made in Kentucky, which a lot of people
Yeah.
don't realize. Um, Went to college and decided to pursue writing, journalism, media after college.
Hmm.
Mostly, I wanted to move to New York. I'd always wanted to live here, and I
Yeah.
thought that I would have opportunity. Did some writing for Forbes. Um, did Helped build the first editorial teams and was the first editorial director at a site called Greatest, Greatist, which is now a Healthline property. Was there for a couple years and then started, and at the time, like throughout my early career, I was active in the weightlifting community. I was active
Hmm.
in the CrossFit community. I actually did some early media work for CrossFit HQ and
Hmm.
covered the CrossFit games for them. Wrote for a number of publications, everything from Times Healthland at the time to Slate to, I was doing a lot of writing even as I was kind of building
Hmm.
this editorial team at Greatest. Ended up becoming kind of a freelance content mercenary for a couple of years, as I like
Hmm.
to tell people. So I would travel around. I spent basically more than half the year on the road doing work for every companies from Samsung to Starbucks to CrossFit to a lot of fitness companies, and it wasn't all health and fitness related, but it got to the point where most of it was.
Hmm.
So, a company wanted to open a corporate wellness center or a gym, I would come in and help with that branding and that content. And I was still very active in the weightlifting and
Hmm.
CrossFit communities at the time. And around early 2016, I actually remember exactly when it was. I was at CES in Las Vegas,
Hmm.
and I had gone out with some folks, and I won't say who or which company they were from, but they were big partiers. And I don't get me wrong, I like to let the proverbial hair down, but I woke up the next morning and I was like, I think I need to slow down. I think I'm kind of losing track of my roots. I'm not really living in New York City, even though I was paying New York City rent. And I thought I didn't want to be a road warrior anymore. So
Hmm.
around that time, I've been doing some consulting work for actually the University of California, San Francisco's medical school, doing some like SEO and digital content consulting work,
Yeah.
and had been working with two folks on that who also lived in New York, and really hit it off well with them. And decided I was like, they actually approached me and they're like, hey, we'd love to work with you in kind of more of a full time capacity. Um, we like your skill set, we like your editorial mind. Is that something you'd be interested in? And I was like, it is. But I
Hmm.
also have this idea. What if we created like the ESPN.com for strength? CrossFit was still growing a lot at the time. Weightlifting,
Hmm.
powerlifting, strongman, bodybuilding were all increasingly popular, but because the traditional print publications were not doing so well, there was not this online home. If you wanted results from like
Hmm.
a powerlifting competition, you might have to wait months until like a magazine arrived in the mail. Like it was
Yeah.
still at that level. So I joined them full time. They had a few other properties that they were kind of incubating, experimenting with. Some nothing happened with. Some
Hmm.
we had smaller exits for. Some just kind of fell by the wayside. And we were also doing some SEO and content consulting at
Hmm.
the time. But under that, we started incubating Barbend. This idea for like, can we create the media company for strength? We started off just writing news. Was really the main thing. It was at a time when the World's Strongest Man results were just coming out in 2016. It was right before the Rio Olympics. So we actually got a lot of early traction just becoming
Hmm.
like the news source
Yeah.
for people who lifted weights,
Oh,
and
wow.
and we
So there's
started getting.
nobody else doing this?
There were some other places doing this, but they tended to
Yeah.
not cover everything, right? Like
Got it.
CrossFit had their own media team, and then
Hmm.
like there were some powerlifting blogs, and there were some weightlifting like forums, but no one was really
Hmm.
covering it all together.
Yeah.
And we realized we could kind of consolidate those eyeballs. And it was around the summer, it was around the Rio Olympics, we started getting cited as a primary source
Hmm.
by Wikipedia and mainstream sports publications like ESPN, Sports Illustrated. And we were like, oh, there might be something here. And we started getting a lot of traffic. We launched with nothing, completely organically, and in our first year we had 1.4 million users, which was great.
Wow.
So we decided to kind of go all in on it. We raised a round of funding, got turned down by every venture capitalist we
Hmm.
talked to. Dozens and dozens just turned us down. Every institutional investor said no. And it's because at the time they thought our opportunity was too small. Everyone wanted to find the next BuzzFeed or the next
Hmm.
Vice Media.
Sure.
Spoiler alert, those didn't end up doing so well as far
Yeah.
as investor money. People thought we were too narrow.
Hmm.
Um, no institutional investor wanted to believe in us, so we had to scrape together a friends and family round. I wrote about this more in a Medium post about like the chronology of Barbend, but it was really lean times the first couple years. We were gaining traction. We knew there was something there, but we just couldn't convince people who could write big checks that there was something there.
Hmm.
Around the time the pandemic hit in 2020, the site had become big enough to where it was profitable. We exited or kind of let go some of the other projects we were working on that actually created supplemental revenue, and we
Hmm.
went all in on Barbend in
Yeah.
2020. Grew the team. We had a few full-time employees, but really grew the team. Considered raising another round of funding. Realized we didn't need to. We could grow it just on profits. And then, by the end of 2020, we were really the largest independent strength publisher online.
Hmm.
By 2022, we were at over 31 million users a year. We were generating nearly $20 million a year gross merchandise value. And then early 2023, or the first half of 2023,
Hmm.
we exited. So that's
Yeah.
kind of the story of Barbend. And there are a lot more nuances there, and there are a lot more inflection points where it's like, hey, do we
Hmm.
wrap this up or do we go all in? That happened a few times, which I wrote about in a Medium post. And,
Hmm.
people can Google it, or maybe you'll link it in the show notes. But it wasn't very glamorous. And I think that
Yeah.
we only announced about a week ago that we have been acquired. And a
Hmm.
lot of people have been reaching out to me really surprised. They were like, I didn't think it was going that well.
Wow.
And that's okay. But I think
Hmm.
that in the startup world, we're used to flash and we're used to increasingly big rounds. They're like,
Sure.
oh, I didn't hear you all. Someone was like, I didn't hear you all had raised again.
Uh-huh.
Well, we didn't need to raise again because we became profitable and we grew it off of just business fundamentals and
Hmm.
basically off of EBITDA, right? And someone else reached out and said, and so for them, the fact that we didn't have like a big Series A or Series B announced, they took that as a bad sign, right?
Yeah.
And I think sometimes when you're building media companies, because the product is just new content you have to churn out day in and day out, outside observers might have trouble noticing that growth. Even though we're
Hmm.
dominating in search rankings, even though
Sure.
we have tens of millions of users a year or a quarter, people are looking at us and they're saying, well, there's nothing really flashy. There's no
Hmm.
like, they didn't announce like a new product update. There's no, Barbend GPT-4. There's no $30 million B round.
Hmm.
There aren't these flashy things. And it wasn't until we were acquired that I think a lot of people who I know, some of my very good friends who were very
Hmm.
supportive, they reached out and they're like, wait, your company was how big? You had how many full-time employees? You
Yeah.
had how many pieces of content? You were driving how much merchandise value for your partners and affiliates? Like what?
Hmm.
Um, and so that was a little bit long-winded, but all that to say, I think the content game can get very unsexy because you have to do it day in and day
Yeah.
out. And you really don't want your users to see that growth. Like you want your users to consume more of your content, but my goal for every reader of Barbend is not to show them how big we are
Hmm.
as a content producer. Our goal with Barbend when we look at our users is, okay, how can we give them an increasingly good and seamless user experience such that they're consuming our content and using our content, but like it's frictionless. They're
Yeah.
not like thinking about it, right?
Hmm.
They're not thinking about like, oh, Barbend's changed a lot or like Barbend's gotten really big. No, they're just reading our content and getting good information out of it like they
Hmm.
always have as we write more of it. Um, so it's a little interesting. And I think that especially now as a very active LP and an active angel investor, like people are really, there's a trend toward unsexy businesses,
Hmm.
right? People want the blue chip businesses.
Yeah.
And I think content, if you're doing niche content, can be a really unsexy business.
Hmm.
Barbend was never going to IPO. And we were never going to raise a, multi tens of millions of dollars, series A, B, or C round. Like we
Hmm.
just, it didn't make sense on our business model. And because of that, there aren't these like newsworthy items for people to point to until
Hmm.
you get acquired. And then suddenly people are like, wait, how big did you all get? What did you do?
Hmm.
And I think it just shows the impact of like how niche audiences can really move the dial, and they are significant. And it's nice to look back and say like, hey, we guessed. We
Hmm.
guessed that these audiences would be big enough, and we were right. That feels good, of course.
Yeah. So there's two things I'd like to double click on. So one is the skill set of copywriting versus being an editor.
Yeah.
And I've seen both of those roles, and this is just, I'm bringing this up because this is something I'm learning. I'm building a couple new websites and funnels, and these people that I'm working with, they're like, look, you definitely need to hire a copy person. It really makes a difference in terms of conversions. And I did see that discipline as a separate discipline, because copy, obviously you want to have someone that could really convert when it comes to tweets and engage, and sometimes that skill set is not the same. It's not that same skill set that an editor may have, writing more long form content, storytelling. So wanted to hear your reaction to that, and I was curious also if you wrote copy alongside writing long form content for Forbes.
Totally. I mean, I would say that my copy, I think writing like a journalistic article, like a
Hmm.
full article, is a very different skill set than quote unquote copywriting, which is like
Yeah.
shorter form landing page style
Mhm.
stuff.
Yeah. Or even
I,
an ad as
or even
well.
an ad. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that skill set I really worked on when I was doing a lot of content consulting.
Yeah.
Because what I would do is a company would hire me and I would kind
Hmm.
of build a team of freelancers, and they would often focus on the longer form stuff. I would be an editor, but the companies would also say, oh, can you help us with this landing page too? They would
Yeah.
kind of add it on at the end, or like, oh, we'll pay you a little extra.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, oh, we actually need that by tomorrow. Can you do that? We'll pay you
Hmm.
this much. And I would just do it. Right. So that's kind of
Hmm.
how I cut my teeth in copywriting. For Barbend, when we first started, for the first 6 months, and I wrote about this in the Medium post, I was writing basically everything.
Hmm.
I was writing like sometimes like more than 30 articles a week, which is
Wow, that's a lot.
more output than I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'll ever be that prolific in anything ever again.
Hmm.
But we had to publish consistently because we wanted to become that news
Hmm.
source of record. And then once we were able to raise some money and actually hire full-time employees, I moved to being more of an editor, but I also still did a lot of copywriting because we were
Hmm.
optimizing pages, we were creating landing pages, home pages, writing social copy, um, trying to figure out all these other things that could organically create organic funnels. Basically, we
Hmm.
weren't necessarily going out and paying for traffic, but we were creating. It could be like a squat calculator, a one rep max
Hmm.
calculator, these fitness tools that needed some content copy around them, and I was doing a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
And they are very different skill sets, and I think that you hit on what you double clicked on, editing and writing and copywriting being three very different skill sets.
Yeah.
I think the real art is blending those together and understanding. Um, on a given project or editorial lift, who's responsible for what, and respecting those skill sets and those different abilities to optimize for those things. Because if you sit a copywriter, an editor, and like a magazine style article writer down in the same room, and they've never worked together before, I guarantee you there's going to be some miscommunication to start, right?
Sure.
So a real benefit is building that rapport and understanding that, you know, Barbend and a lot of content companies these days, we work with a lot of freelancers. Barbend works with a lot of freelancers because some of the smartest minds in strength training and strength sports, they're not full-time writers. They might be coaches. They might be gold medal winning athletes. They might be they might be researchers, right? We work with a lot of researchers. You know, if you're doing research at a university, you're not going to write for Barbend full-time. You might write for Barbend a couple times a month. So obviously we're going to work with freelancers. But we really wanted to focus on, and this is another thing that the VCs didn't want us to do. We wanted to focus on building in-house editorial capacity so that our editors could build rapport with the writers, so that they could build rapport with each other and really develop systems based around people, right? And understanding that quality would get better as our people made the systems better, not the other way around.
So I'd like to also talk a little more about growth, right? So you scaled to, I believe it was 1.4 million in the first year. Users. So traffic, you know, there's different ways to look at traffic, right? There could be organic, there could be social. It sounds like a lot of your levers were on the content creation. Some people just pay for traffic, right? They run ads to go to a landing page. So it would be helpful, you know, whatever you're allowed to share or any advice that you have in terms of how to build an engine kind of like you did to kind of get to that level of traffic, because that's still a lot of traffic for just, you know, the first early years.
Yeah, and we were starting from, you know, absolutely zero, right? The domain name barbend.com had never been live before. I bought it for $7, which was probably the best domain name score I'll ever have in my life. You know, I would have loved to have gone out in the early days and bought traffic. We didn't have money, so we couldn't. But the good news is I came from an editorial background with an emphasis on SEO. My co-founders had a ton of SEO experience. And so we realized that we could start writing things early on and optimize to make the site fast, to make the site responsive, to write good content, to create internal links, to do these things such that, you know, we're not going to dominate the search engine results pages of the SERPs immediately, but people are going to be looking for very specific things in an underserved content niche. So we didn't have a ton of competitors. So what that allowed us to do is, okay, we were at results on, you know, the 2016 World's Strongest Man. There weren't 100 different outlets competing for those results. There were like a handful. And so we started showing up a little bit, and we started getting noticed in the strength community because, you know, we always said we were for strength athletes by strength athletes. I'm a huge strength nerd. I still love exploring physical culture. And so people understood that we were authentic. It's what we were focused on. We weren't a mainstream outlet writing like one token results pay article for this competition. Like, this was our bread and butter, was the strength world. And those readers started coming back, right? And they started coming to us to get results from competition. So it built very slowly. And, you know, most of the traffic we got that first year was in the back half of that year because we started from absolutely nothing. But I remember the first day we got 20,000 visitors to the site. I think it was the summer of 2016, about 4 or 5 months after we launched. And it was based off of both a news article we'd written and an evergreen piece that one of our first contributors wrote. And that's when I realized that we could really grow this and use news as a bit of a flywheel. The news would get people in the door. They would find it because they were looking for results and they were looking for the latest. But then they would also start reading our other content. They would also start reading good think pieces, op-eds, in-depth training and analysis pieces by some of the smartest minds in strength. I was like, okay, the news will get them in the door, but they may stick around for some of this other content. And really, when we hired our first full-time editorial team in late 2016, early 2017, it was to double down on like, okay, we know we can produce news. Can we produce other things as well? So there isn't like an A, B, and C, I think, for launching a content company. I think it's a little bit like breaking out of prison. No one does it the same
Yeah.
way twice. And there's not an easy to follow rubric, but
Yeah.
consistency was really important for us. And news was the flywheel that fed into the other
Mhm.
types of content that we eventually began to write.
Was the news the center? I'll just go to the website real quick. But was news the center area of the page, or
It,
did you
it,
get people in? Because
it
it looks like you
was.
got some trending. Looks like you got some kind of trending headlines
Yeah.
coming in.
I
Yeah.
mean, the website looks
Latest
different than it.
news.
The website looks different than it did. Let me put it that
Hmm.
way. The early
Yeah.
stages of Barbend, you came and there were like 4 tabs at the top. It was like weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit,
Yeah.
strongman. And you could just toggle between the sports and just, it was
Hmm.
basically pretty much all news. Like the first few months,
Yeah.
first almost year, like the vast majority of what we wrote as news was
Hmm.
news. And we still write a lot of news. We still write more news than anyone in the strength
Yeah.
space because we're Barbend. But that became how people would find us in search engine
Hmm.
results pages. And then once they realized we had other types of content, they started coming directly to the website.
Yeah. And then did you guys leverage any newsletters or just kind of like email notifications to kind of get people in
We
as well? Or
we didn't really start a newsletter program until
Mhm.
years later. It's pretty
Yeah,
active now. We have 2
sure.
sizable newsletters,
Hmm.
but we didn't start it until years later. People could subscribe to notifications when we
Hmm.
publish certain things, which they still have the option to do.
Yeah.
And we were pretty early to submit things directly to Google News, right?
Hmm.
Google had some early programs where you could like ask to get your site listed in Google News, or say like, hey, we want to submit this specifically to Google News.
Oh,
And
nice.
because we were publishing so much news, like they were
Hmm.
like, sure, right? Like Google News really liked our
Yeah.
content, and I think that helped a lot. So it wasn't
Hmm.
even necessarily showing up in the main feed of Google all the time. It was showing up in like the news tab and things like
Hmm.
that. So um, we were pretty big on that. And then frankly, this was a very different time in the Facebook ecosystem.
Hmm.
Facebook was content producers were doing much better on Facebook back then than they are now.
Oh, yeah.
And you could publish, if you were the first to publish a quality results article for like the Olympics
Hmm.
or something like that, it would really take off on Facebook. It could
Yeah.
really take off and get hundreds of thousands of impressions on Facebook and on
Hmm.
Facebook Instant, which was a big thing at the time.
Sure.
So which is basically where Facebook would like kind of scrape your article and you would
Hmm.
get credit for it, but it would anyway. It's a little bit like Apple News is,
Hmm.
I guess. And that was really big for us as well. Obviously, Facebook changed a lot about their algorithms. It really tanked a lot of outlets. I know Now This, which
Hmm.
was like all in on Facebook, really
Yeah.
struggled and lost like 90% of their traffic or something like that. I don't remember exactly what, like overnight after Facebook changed
Hmm.
something. So we really tried to diversify across different platforms and search engines. But yeah, I mean, I didn't go on vacation. I didn't really travel much. Like I remember bringing my computer to parties. Like I went to a friend's birthday party and I brought my computer and I asked for like the bar's Wi-Fi so
Yeah.
I could write a results article like at
Oh,
this
wow.
party. We just had an unrelenting commitment to publishing all the news that we thought was relevant in our space.
Hmm.
And it worked. And it was important at the beginning, and it showed people early on that they could come to Barbend as a resource, and those
Hmm.
readers stuck and they grew, and it created a bit of a snowball effect.
Yeah, no, that's really valuable. I mean, I think just kind of building that content strategy, learning from it, and then really just kind of optimizing for SEO was a superpower that you had. I follow Neil Patel a lot. He
Yep.
shares a lot of really great just knowledge on SEO. He's like one of the SEO experts, and he's been posting a lot on how video content is now getting optimized in
Yeah.
Google search. So I think you also have to think about the medium that you're comfortable with. That's something that I would like to get more involved in terms of like written content. So I'd love to hear if you have any kind of high level SEO learnings, like best practices on, building links that convert, or like backlinks, or how that works. I mean, do you think you can kind of give us some like top level learnings that you've learned over the years in terms of how to improve SEO?
SEO is a constantly changing environment.
Hmm.
We have an SEO team, a dedicated SEO team at Barbend. They're
Yeah.
fantastic. So I can't give like the playbook because we just don't have enough
Hmm.
time, and it's such a
Yeah.
broad thing.
Hmm.
How do you distill someone's entire job down to like a small segment? But what I will
Sure.
say is the most important tool for SEO is to write quality content, write
Hmm.
content that people want to share.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, one thing that helped early on, I'll give an anecdote, is we noticed at the Rio Olympics in 2016, I was like up late writing results for all these different weightlifting sessions.
Hmm.
We started getting we were using various like tools to see which inbound links we were getting and which inbound traffic
Mm-hmm.
sources we were getting. And suddenly we got this like influx of inbound traffic from Wikipedia.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it's because the editors at Wikipedia were choosing to cite our results articles because they were really good. Like
Oh, wow.
they were
Okay.
accurate. They gave
Yeah.
context. They gave context above and beyond what the
Mm-hmm.
major mainstream publishers were giving.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, and that's better than any like, that's like the best strategy, right? When
Mm-hmm.
someone wants to link to your content and wants to send traffic to you, that's the best strategy. So if you write
Mm-hmm.
best in class content or you write content that people want, you identify a realm of content that people want, but they're not getting anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, that compounds to be the best SEO strategy you could ever ask for.
Yeah.
And that remains our best SEO strategy was
Mm-hmm.
just writing great news content.
Is that considered domain authority? Because I've heard that term before too. So
Yeah.
kind of like partner with the larger, well-known domain, and if they cite you or they kind of link to you.
Domain authority is weird because it's like
Mm-hmm.
it's this number that gets assigned, and like different tools
Mm-hmm.
and different companies will like have different measures for domain authority. But factors include like the maturity of your website, the size of your website, referring domains, and it's this like weird number that like is kind of an approximate. It's people trying to approximate how Google sees your site. Is
Mm-hmm.
kind of what it is, right?
Yeah.
That's like maybe an oversimplification, and I'm sure like
Mm-hmm.
some actual SEO experts will listen to this and be like, David, you're wrong. But like that's how I think about it in my mind, just for like to
Yeah.
keep my sanity. And it builds over time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So most blogs are have a very low domain authority number, maybe under
Mm-hmm.
40 or under 30. The New York Times has a domain authority in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
Barbend is a domain of, I don't know exactly what domain authority is off the top of my head, and right, and like different tools will assign different, it'll vary a few points either way, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we're ticking up into the 80s, I think. And so, like, don't get too obsessed with that. It's a measure of basically, domain authority is useful. I think it's useful in that every quarter you want your domain authority to go up if you're a content publisher, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like, it's not a number that I think you should check every day because it's
Sure.
not going to change every day,
I
and
know.
it incorporates all these different factors and all these different SEO signals, and like, so don't get too obsessed with it
Mm-hmm.
because it's about making progress in the long term. It's kind of like your credit score. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
don't like. Joel, it doesn't make sense for us to check our credit scores every day,
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
But
you
like,
might need to check it if you're trying to do something big, like buy a house or something, and it may
right,
be, that may be the period or, a few moments where you might check it, but maybe a couple times a year, probably, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
Or like, your retirement account. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the best advice I ever heard is like, don't check your retirement account every day because it's going to be frustrating and it's going to
Yeah.
go up and down with the markets. But the point is, over time, it will go up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just make sure you're doing the things. Focus on the things that make it go up over time. Don't
Yeah.
focus on the number.
Mm-hmm.
And I think domain authority it falls under that realm.
And one thing that you said earlier, which I do agree with, is just scaling in general is not as sexy. You're really just trying to perfect the same thing that you're doing and really compound that over time. So if you're, you got from like 1.4 million to, I think, what was it, 19 or 20 million?
Oh, over 31 million in
31
2022.
million.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
The
think we're
GMV was 19 million.
the GMV was around that's an estimate.
Yeah.
GMV is kind of hard to estimate. And by the way, that
Yeah.
GMV does not include other forms of revenue, other like
Sure.
significant forms of
Yeah.
and GMV is not revenue, by the way.
Yeah.
That is not GMV does not equal revenue. I just want to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
It's gross merchandise value is a different number.
Yep.
We are a little bit tight-lipped about how much we sold for. We're a
Mm-hmm.
little bit tight-lipped about how much Barbend was making every year. It was a
Absolutely.
private acquisition. Like, we're not gonna
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to share that, but
Yeah.
we share some numbers to give folks a sense of the impact Barbend has,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a very large media company in the grand scheme of things relative to other niche media companies, and it's very impactful in the space. And my hope in sharing some of these numbers, I'm not going to share exactly
Yep.
what we sold for, but I'm going to share some of these numbers to encourage folks that there
Mm-hmm.
is opportunity in media to build new media properties, and there is
Mm-hmm.
opportunity in media entrepreneurship, because like we were saying earlier, it's a quote unquote dark time in
Mm-hmm.
media with a lot of layoffs and a lot of consolidation and some bankruptcies. But I think that is distracting from the fact
Mm-hmm.
that while some of those legacy brands are having a really tough time, smaller or newer or more focused or more targeted outlets like Barbend are actually seeing a lot of success. So that's why I share those numbers, not
Yeah.
necessarily say, look at us, look how much we're worth, but to say, look at the impact we're having.
Mm-hmm. One thing that could be a fun experience as Barbend continues to grow is thinking about what Barbend could acquire. And I think there are some evolutions in media where people are creators, they're micro influencers on TikTok and Instagram. So have you thought down the road some type of property that you could acquire, or maybe just a different type of medium that could be interesting to supplement Barbend?
Yeah, so we did actually acquire a site called Breaking Muscle in
Mm-hmm.
2021. They were kind of the first one of the early training content and fitness content sites on the web. It's actually the first site
Mm-hmm.
that I really started reading when I was starting my strength training
Yeah.
journey. We actually acquired them in 2021. They had been
Mm-hmm.
a little bit not neglected necessarily, but they had just been publishing a lot less, and they had kind of
Mm-hmm.
contracted a little bit. We relaunched that in early 2022, about a year ago. It actually has
Yeah.
a separate editorial team. And when Pillar 4 acquired Barbend, they also acquired Breaking Muscle. It's still its own,
Sure.
it actually has its own team, its own editorial team, its own voice. It's actually very
Mm-hmm.
different from Barbend.
Yeah.
It's related content, but for a slightly different audience. And so, when we were independent, we were in the mood to acquire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now that we're part of Pillar 4, um, there is, look, I can't speak to that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not, I am involved with. I talked to a lot of the folks at Pillar 4 involved in
Mm-hmm.
M&A. I'm still very new with the company.
Yeah.
But I think that the desire for growth and the desire to keep growing Pillar 4's fitness vertical is definitely
Mm-hmm.
there. And, I don't have to stay on at Barbend. There was
Yeah.
no, like, as part of the deal, it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
required for me to stay on
Sure.
full time, but I wanted to. And I was like, guys, can I stay on? And like, what
Mm-hmm.
value can I continue to bring the brand? I'm not going to be CEO anymore.
Yeah.
What value can I continue to bring the brand? And we figured out something really cool. And I'm just so thrilled to be here because I think Barbend is just reaching, like, I don't think we're anywhere near the ceiling. Like, I think
Mm-hmm.
Barbend can double, triple, quadruple in size in the next 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
And
That's
so,
exciting.
like, I think we can go toe to toe with like the men's
Mm-hmm.
health of the world. Speaking of Hearst, right? Like, I think we can,
Yeah.
I think we can and should be bigger than that property.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think it will happen. So
Mm-hmm.
I think there are opportunities to acquire awesome properties in the space for companies like Pillar 4. I
Mm-hmm.
don't. you- I don't want to claim that my focus that I'm like looking at other properties right now.
Yeah.
What I want to say is, I'm focused on doing what I can to support
Mm-hmm.
the Barbend team as we continue to grow.
Yeah. What are some, and this is pretty broad, but, um, what are the different types of goals that people have as they're trying to think about fitness, right? So some of it's weight loss, some of it's, building muscle. I guess, can you unpack that a little bit in terms of just, and it's selfishly for myself, that's one thing that I'm trying to
Yeah.
prioritize a little more, just better physical wellness.
Everyone has different goals. Weight loss is huge. Um, Building muscle mass is huge.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that, if you have 10 different people and you talk to
Mm-hmm.
them, you'll get 20 different weight loss goals. You'll get 20 different fitness goals.
Oh,
Because
there's that many.
someone might want to lose weight and build muscle. Someone might want
Yeah.
to quote unquote tone up, which is a bit of a controversial
Mm-hmm.
term in the fitness industry, but that's okay. Someone might want to feel better. Someone might want to
Mm-hmm.
increase their mobility and get more flexible. Someone might just want to, have an easier time playing with their kids or carrying home the groceries,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can have different goals.
Yeah.
We don't have to have just one singular goal all the time. One thing that I'm really keen on, and it's a goal that's becoming more popular as more research comes out and as places like Barbend produce more content on it. I'm a big believer in resistance training as a powerful anti-aging tool.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, is a very real thing.
Mm-hmm.
And as you lose muscle as you age, it does, your body will have more trouble keeping muscle mass as you age. It increases your risk of injury. It increases your risk of becoming less independent as an individual as you age. It increases your fall risk, and it increases your risk of all sorts of comorbidities. And so something that I'm personally very passionate about, and I think is often reflected in Barbend's content, even though I'm not directing content day to day, and I haven't for quite a while, is is resistance training part of a long-term health outlook?
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the best goals we can make, like I am in my 30s, I have goals of like lifting this particular weight or running this particular, mile time or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. That's all great. But my long-term goal personally, and one that I really love sharing with people and talking to people about, is how I move now improve my quality of life 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, right?
Sure.
Am I going to be able to do a push-up when I'm in my 50s, 60s, 70s, or 80s,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because like I can lift a lot of weight right now. That's
Mm-hmm.
great. That's awesome, right? Um, but I want to be able to lift some weight, maybe not as much, and feel good about how I move and
Mm-hmm.
be mobile and independent in 30 years. So what can I do now to build habits in the base that's going to allow me to do that, right? Because deadlifting 500 pounds right now is cool, and that's something I love do. I
Mm-hmm.
love being able to do, right? I don't think I'll care about that when I'm 60 years old
Sure.
as much. But I think what I will care about is, am I moving well? Am I independent? Am I able to get out of bed in the morning
Mm-hmm.
and look forward to the day physically without a ton of aches and pains, or while minimizing those aches and pains? So yeah, how can resistance training and doing things that promote the retention or growth of muscle mass as we age, how can that improve quality of life at
Mm-hmm.
an individual level and at the population level? That's something I'm obsessed with now, and I think that's an overarching goal that I have regardless of my specific health and fitness
Mm-hmm.
goals.
Can we just spend a couple seconds talking about diet? So, what are some of the hot topics that you're hearing from, these people that have all these goals? We hear a lot of people as they get older, they go vegan completely, like Mark Cuban's vegan, and I think Arnold Schwarzenegger's vegan. So, I hear that a lot. I hear, for me personally, I just try to cut carbs because if I eat a lot of rice and bread, I can feel it. So that's something that I've been trying to do. But any other just kind of hot topics that you hear across the market or the industry?
So Barbend, we don't push a particular nutritional regimen because
Hmm.
everyone responds differently
Yeah.
to nutrition. You can actually. This is something I learned from the folks. There's a company called Levels that does blood glucose
Hmm.
monitoring, and this is not me. This is not an ad or a shill for them.
Hmm.
But I was talking to one of their founders on a podcast a couple of years ago, and they were involved in research that took identical twins and gave them the same food, and they
Hmm.
actually had opposite blood glucose reactions. People
Oh,
are so
wow.
individual when it
Yeah.
comes to our gut biomes and the way our body
Hmm.
responds to food. How you respond to certain macronutrients is going to be very different than how I respond, Joel.
Hmm.
um, but funnily enough, I was talking to a very good friend of mine, Adam Bornstein, who is a multi-time. He's a New York Times best-selling author. He used to be the fitness director at Men's Health. He actually works very closely with Arnold Schwarzenegger
Hmm.
and his content companies and brands. And Adam's new book is coming out May 23rd. It's called "You Can't Screw This Up,"
Hmm.
and it's about it's a nutrition and wellness book that very much takes the stance of there is no perfect diet.
Yeah.
You have to figure out what works for you. Some
Hmm.
people want plant-based. That's great. Some people are carnivores. You know, obviously talk to a medical professional before making any significant dietary
Sure.
change is an important thing, right? Get your
Yeah.
blood work done. Talk to your doctor.
Hmm.
People respond very differently to different things. To the same, or they respond very differently to the same things. But there is no perfect diet. There might be a diet that's healthiest for you, but if you have
Hmm.
a heck of a time sticking to it and it stresses you out and you lapse and it ends up creating a cycle of binging,
Hmm.
that's not the healthiest diet for you,
Yeah.
right?
It's not.
Finding that the middle of that Venn diagram between impactful and sustainable and long term, and one that also keeps you from tearing your hair out because you're so frustrated, that's what's important. And Adam's new book, I'm really excited about it. Had him on the Barbend podcast
Hmm.
actually. He called it "You Can't Screw This Up" because there is no magic formula, right? There is no
Hmm.
like. It's not like playing an old Sonic the Hedgehog game where you have to collect the rings in a particular order, right?
Yeah.
You can figure out what works for you, and with that comes flexibility. And if you take a long-term approach to that, to figuring out what works for you, you're going to have success, right?
Hmm.
If you focus on finding what works for you and you ask for help, you're going to have success. The worst thing you can do is start off by creating a very rigid box and forcing yourself to stay in it for the rest of your life when it comes to nutrition. So that's a mindset that really resonates with me. It's something that I've seen Adam, who is a true one of the OG fitness experts who's seen a lot and tells it like it is. It's a way I've seen his thought process evolve over the past decade since his last book
Yeah.
came out, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So really, really interesting. And I would say, like, people stress about nutrition, and they stress about nutrition to the point where it stops them from actually reaching and working toward nutritional goals.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one of the spirits of what you've been building is really a community. So you don't have to be alone as well. You talked about asking for help. So having the right support system to kind of be there to cheer you on, or also just kind of hold you accountable, I think is definitely super valuable as well. So
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And
yeah.
yeah, build your tribe, right? Build the people
Hmm.
who lift you up and support you, and help you make more balanced, consistent decisions.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely. Well, we got about 4 minutes left. So if we have any other questions, we can kind of recap it on the LinkedIn post. But one thing that I always ask every guest towards the end is really just kind of maybe a reflective learning, on life or business. Obviously, you had a big event, recently on the business side, but just any kind of like high level learnings or just takeaways or life lessons from maybe the last quarter that you want to share. Maybe we can
yeah,
wrap up with that.
the biggest thing I would say, and Joel, this is something you and I have talked about at length
Hmm.
in some of our conversations. Um, I am someone, and I've shared this with you,
Hmm.
man. FOMO is rough for me, right? Like,
Yeah.
I fall victim to it. I can fall victim to that mentality. And in media, there's a lot of flash.
Hmm.
And investing, where there's also a lot of flash. Oh, someone just raised this big Series B. Someone just had this exit. Someone had this new product. It can really distract from the consistent work that actually builds valuable tools and valuable
Hmm.
companies over time.
Yeah.
And I hope that, look, Barbend is not the last thing I hope to start in life.
Hmm.
I don't know if I'll I probably won't start a fitness content company again,
Yeah.
right? But like, I love creating things. So some of the stuff I'm
Uh-huh.
doing in the spirits world, the whiskey world, which I've told you about, like, I love creating things.
Hmm.
And um, what can get distracting is seeing other people either have quicker success or have a different type of success, or have these milestones that are very public. But a lot of Barbend was built in relative obscurity
Hmm.
and in relative silence, and I got distracted from that a few times.
Yeah.
And it was detrimental to my
Hmm.
well-being, and it was oftentimes detrimental to the company. I think Barbend would have grown faster and better if I had been able to stay focused and not look at the next shiny thing, and not have
Yeah.
that green monster, not have envy,
Hmm.
you know, come up and rear its ugly head. And so it's okay to build quietly. I think building in public is a powerful tool. I think
Hmm.
in the age of social media, it's something very cool that people should take advantage of. But it is okay to build things quietly and
Hmm.
consistently. And sometimes that pays off. And I hope that's a reflection that sticks with me for a while. And I
Hmm.
hope it's something that you keep me accountable on, my friend.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
the next time you hear me complain and go like, oh, I don't think this thing is moving fast enough. I hope you look at me and you're like, David, remember what we talked about?
I'm just gonna give you this timestamp and be like, hey, remember I have this on record that you said that you should take your time and build slowly, and you're right. I mean, we, as successful business people, we see competitors in the market,
Yeah.
and they may hit some milestone. We're like, oh, well, what, we're too hard on ourselves too. We're like, wait a minute, like we're not doing what they're doing. We weren't mentioned in the New York Times. So what's going on? We're not as popular as they are. So I think that's important too. I think it's a lot of people spend a lot of time on PR and buying that press, where other people can kind of be laser focused on just building the business and growing revenue and increasing the value of the company. So all good lessons, and really good catching up, and we'll do something over the summer, man. Hope to get some FaceTime very soon.
I look forward to it, Joel. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you coming on. All right.